Gustavo Fring, a businessman, a philanthropist, a respected member of the Albuquerque community. But beneath that polite, soft-spoken demeanor hid one of the most ruthless and calculated figures in the drug trade. A man whose every action was planned with precision. A man who never hesitated to eliminate anyone who stood in his way. Today, we're breaking down every single person Gus Fring killed or orchestrated the death of in his relentless rise to power. The murder that started it all, Maximino Arciniega. To truly understand Gus Fring's philosophy on killing, we have to go back to the murder that changed everything for him. The death of his close friend and business partner, Maximino Arciniega. Max was the brains behind the chemistry, the man responsible for creating high-quality meth that Gus wanted to distribute. But when they presented their operation to Don Eladio Fuente, head of the Juarez cartel, they were met with ruthless rejection. Rather than negotiate, Don Eladio saw Max's proposition as an insult. Right in front of Gus, he ordered Hector Salamanca to shoot Max in the head. The blood poured into the pool as Gus was forced to watch, powerless. This was the moment that turned Gus Fring into the man we know, the patient, calculating, and utterly merciless kingpin who would spend decades plotting his revenge. The Juan Bolsa betrayal, fast forward years later. Gus has built an empire within the United States, working under the cartel's radar while strengthening his own infrastructure. But there's one man standing in his way, Juan Bolsa, a high-ranking cartel member. Gus knew that to eventually take down the entire cartel, he had to weaken it from within. So he orchestrated Bolsa's death in one of the most efficient ways possible, setting him up to be gunned down by Mexican federales. With a simple phone call, Gus watched from the sidelines as Bolsa was taken out, removing yet another piece from the board, the cold-blooded execution of Victor. Perhaps the most shocking and unexpected killing Gus ever carried out was the brutal execution of his own enforcer, Victor. Victor made the mistake of being seen at the crime scene of Gail Bedeker's murder. Though he was a loyal foot soldier, Gus couldn't afford any weak links. So, in one of Breaking Bad's most terrifyingly silent moments, Gus slit Victor's throat with a box cutter, staring into the eyes of Walter White and Jesse Pinkman, as if to say, "This is what happens when you disappoint me." The message was loud and clear. Loyalty meant nothing to Gus if it came at the expense of his empire. The Salamanca hit and the cartel massacre. If Juan Bolsa's death was strategic, the next move Gus made was nothing short of legendary. The Juarez cartel had been a thorn in his side for years, but Gus was a patient man. When the time came, he struck with precision. Under the guise of making peace with Don Eladio, he traveled to Mexico, gifting him and his men a bottle of tequila. But this was no ordinary drink. Gus had poisoned the liquor, and one by one, every cartel member at the party fell to their knees, convulsing and gasping for breath. As bodies hit the floor, Gus calmly walked to the pool, knelt down, and vomited out the poison he had consumed to avoid suspicion. In one masterstroke, he had completely dismantled the cartel that once humiliated him. This wasn't just a power move, it was vengeance, decades in the making. After eliminating Don Eladio and his top lieutenants, there was only one loose end left, Joaquin Salamanca, the nephew of Hector Salamanca. Joaquin was one of the last loyal cartel soldiers, but he stood no chance against Jesse Pinkman, who was forced to shoot him under Gus's command. And just like that, Gus had finally destroyed the organization that took Max from him. Hector Salamanca, the final kill. Hector Salamanca had always been a thorn in Gus's side. He was the last surviving member of the Salamanca family, an old man trapped in a broken body, filled with nothing but hate. Gus tormented him, made him watch as his family fell one by one. And when the time came, Gus believed he had won, but he underestimated Hector's rage and Walter White's genius. Gus's arrogance cost him everything. As he walked out of that room, seemingly unscathed, he adjusted his tie, one last show of control, and then he fell. The once untouchable kingpin, now just another casualty of the drug trade. While Gus personally killed or directly ordered the deaths of several people, there were others whose fate he manipulated without ever pulling the trigger himself. Hank Schrader's near-fatal ambush at the hands of the cousins, that was Gus feeding them false information. Gail Bedeker's execution, that was Gus positioning him as Walter White's replacement, forcing Walt and Jesse to take him out. Hector Salamanca's suicide bombing that killed Gus himself? Ironically, that too was a result of Gus's own actions, as he underestimated the old man's ability to seek revenge. Gus Fring's legacy wasn't just in the people he killed, it was in the empire he built. He played a long game, moving pieces on the chessboard until he was the last one standing. But power comes with blind spots, and in the end, Gus's obsession with control became his undoing. His downfall was a reminder that in the world of Breaking Bad, no one is untouchable. But even after his death, his influence lingered. The remnants of his empire fell into the hands of new players, and his methods became a blueprint for those who sought to dominate the drug trade. Gus was different from most villains in Breaking Bad because he wasn't driven by impulse, greed, or even personal addiction to power. He was cold, methodical, and always 3 steps ahead of his enemies, until Walter White, a man who understood the power of unpredictability, found his weakness. Gus operated with surgical precision, removing threats with ruthless efficiency, but his ultimate flaw was that he believed he had complete control over every situation. In reality, his enemies were just as willing to play dirty, and in the end, Hector Salamanca's thirst for revenge was greater than Gus's need for dominance. One of the most fascinating aspects of Gus's character was his ability to balance 2 entirely different identities. To the public, he was a respectable businessman, a generous philanthropist, and a calm, well-mannered restaurant owner. But beneath that facade, he was a monster, one who never hesitated to kill when necessary. This duality made him one of the most compelling villains in television history. Unlike Walter White, who descended into villainy over time, Gus was already a fully formed antagonist when we met him, a man who had perfected the art of deception. Even after his death, the shadow of Gustavo Fring loomed over the Breaking Bad universe. His assassination left a power vacuum in the drug trade, which led to the rise of Jack Welker's neo-Nazi gang and ultimately paved the way for Walter White's complete downfall. His influence extended beyond Breaking Bad and into Better Call Saul, where we saw his rise to power and the lengths he went to in order to build his empire. His manipulation of Nacho Varga, his silent war against the Salamancas, and his cold-blooded strategy all reinforced that Gus was not just a drug lord, he was a master tactician. Gus's downfall was a rare case where he was simply outplayed by someone who had nothing to lose. His meticulous nature made him almost untouchable, but it also made him vulnerable to someone willing to embrace chaos. In the end, he was a man who believed in absolute control, yet he died in an explosion he never saw coming.